Father of the House, Sir Edward Lee.
The crisis about small boats crossing the Channel is utterly debilitating and is alienating millions of people from the whole political process. And imagine how the whole atmosphere would lighten if the government had come here today and said, this sort of farce can't continue, and from midnight tonight, if you land illegally on these shores, we will get out of any convention, you will be detained and deported immediately from where you've come from. But I want to ask a particular constituency point. Such is the crisis around how to house these people. There are reports today in the Times and other newspapers that the government is thinking of opening disused military sites and is looking at 2 or 3 in particular. Now, the government gave a solemn promise that they would not use RAF Scampton to house illegal migrants. Can you confirm that solemn promise still stands?
Secretary of State.
He's heard, and he heard the Housing Secretary talking about this morning, that we are looking at military sites, and there are a number of them that we're looking intently. I'm afraid I'm unable to give him the reassurance in relation to his own constituency because I haven't got the list in front of me, but I will ensure that the appropriate minister makes contact with him.
Maureen de Jos.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is, of course, deeply concerning that a dangerous criminal was released onto the streets, and this should not have happened. But I do want to thank the Deputy Prime Minister for his honest assessment of what happened and for acknowledging that what happened was wrong. But does he agree with me that we are actually dealing with 14 years of Tory neglect with overcrowded and understaffed prisons, and when things go wrong, as they have done, it is essential that we take swift and decisive action so that the public trust in the justice system is maintained, and that is exactly what we are doing now.
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm very grateful to the right honourable gentleman. The truth is that under this government, in our first year in office, over 5,100 foreign national offenders were removed from this country. That's the truth. We've removed 2,500 more from prison than in recent times. And the truth is, under the last government, there were 800 releases in error and no full independent investigation. That is the truth, and it's under this watch that we're going to change that.
Marie Goldman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The trial, sentencing and mistaken release of Hadouch Kabatu all took place in the heart of my Chelmsford constituency, and it is entirely unacceptable. I firstly want to thank Essex Police, British Transport Police and the Metropolitan Police, as well as the public's vigilance, for ensuring that he was apprehended and will now be deported. I welcome the announcement of an independent investigation, but the government must ensure that any recommendations are implemented in full, without delay, and not just left to gather dust on a bookshelf. Turning to prison leadership, does the Justice Secretary agree with me that scapegoating a single prison officer for systemic failure is unacceptable, and that if leaders, including prison governors, are found to be at fault, they should resign?
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm very grateful to the honourable lady, and I know that this has been shocking for her constituents, and I know that the reports and the scenes of this prisoner wandering around Chelmsford will have been incredibly disturbing, and particularly disturbing for the victims of her crime. And I know that she has spoken to the prisons minister, and I'm very grateful that she reached out in the way that she has, and I think she's spoken to the governor as well. Now, I know that we have suspended the officer involved pending an investigation. That must be right and proper. But I hope that she will recognise, in asking Dame Lynn Owens to look at this closely, that of course we will take seriously her recommendations, and I will ensure that this House has full scrutiny of those recommendations when they come forward.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The case of Kabatu exposed deep failings in our prison system. As a result, as we heard, 14 years of failure by the previous Tory government. failings made worse by chronic staff shortages. Now, the immediate reckless skilled visa rule change risks forcing hundreds of experienced overseas officers out of the service overnight. At HMP Liverpool, 40% of staff could be affected. So can the Minister explain how stripping our prisons of trained staff will make them safer or help prevent further failures like these seen in Mr Kabatu's case?
Very grateful to my honourable friend, and I want to reassure her that the Prison Minister is talking to Home Office colleagues about these very same issues at this time.
Dr Neil Hudson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, my thoughts are with the victims of this sex offender's crimes, including the 14-year-old Epping schoolgirl. They and their families want answers as to how this major breach could have happened. Now, the Prime Minister and the Justice Secretary have said that they were appalled and livid. Well, that's great. So is everyone. But ministers are not commentators. Exactly. They are in charge, and ultimately, they are accountable for this. Madam Deputy Speaker, this hasn't gone away for the people of Epping. The twice-weekly protests continue. No one wants to see our town repeatedly the lead story in the news, and the events of recent days have raised again community anxiety and distress. Will the government now get a grip on this issue, address the illegal immigration crisis that has spun out of control on their watch, and do the right and safe thing and close the Bell Hotel immediately?
Secretary of State.
Well, the honourable gentleman is right in the beginning of his question to centre the victims of these crimes and their anxiety and to hold that dear. And it's why the first thing I said to Lynn Owens was, would she reach out to those victims and just hear from them as she went about her work. I'm quite sure, because I know Epping very well, I'm quite sure that his constituents know that the crisis that we inherited begun under the last government, and their discontent in relation to asylum and immigration, the inability of the last government to deal with the gangs, the collapse of the Rwanda scheme, and the outrage of asylum hotels all begun under the last government, and he knows that as well as I do.
Chris Webb.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank my right friend, Deputy Prime Minister, for coming today to address this serious issue. Many of my constituents raised it with me over the weekend. I do notice not a single member from Reform here, especially the member for Runcorn. I'm assuming she's still running scared after horrific racist remarks over the weekend. But can the Deputy Prime Minister confirm that deportation of Kabatu will proceed unhindered and without delay to...
Order. I'd ask the honourable gentleman to ponder on his words and perhaps suggest that he does withdraw that remark that he's just made about another honourable member from this chamber.
OK, on your advice, I've withdrawn that remark. So, to finish my question, will the Deputy Prime Minister ensure that there is a swift plan that when mistakes are made, it's essential to ensure that public trust is remained in these justice systems?
Well, my honourable friend is right. And it's hugely important because it's important to put in context not only the victims who would have been anxious, but also the inheritance of the backlog in our courts so that people can't get justice. He's right also to reference the honourable member for Runcorn, who I see is not in her seat, despite her very inflammatory statements over the weekend.
Sir Ashley Fox.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is outrageous that Kabatu was not deported at the end of his sentence. What is worse is that the number of prisoners released by mistake has more than doubled under this government. Now, if the Deputy Prime Minister is determined to release thousands more prisoners early, how confident is he that this mistake will not be repeated again and again on his watch?
Secretary of State.
Well, can I say to him that there is actually a point of agreement between the two main parties, and that is that foreign national offenders who commit crimes should be deported as quickly as possible. And under the sentencing bill, we are attempting to do that. And it's actually something that the Shadow Justice Secretary has raised, and I think that's one point at least of agreement. I'm serious about getting to grips with the early release issue. And I'm serious when I say, and he knows this, that this story begun before we came to office. It's why one of our most senior police officers will be looking at this issue, and of course we will take serious all of her recommendations. It's hugely important that the public see the system working and that they feel safe.
Madam Deputy Speaker, Hadouch Kabatu is clearly a depraved individual and a dangerous pervert who should be booted out of the country without delay. But my constituents get sick and tired of having to foot the bill of the cost of housing foreign national offenders in British jails. And so, therefore, can he reassure them that the sentencing bill will make it much easier to deport those individuals and make sure they're in foreign jails where they belong rather than clogging up our prisons?
Well, my honourable friend's exactly right. £54,000 it costs a year to have any individual in prison in our country. It's a lot of money. And that's why it's important that we reduce the period that they're in our country, and that once they've been convicted and served 30% of their time, that we can deport them back to where they come from. And that's where, of course, Kabatu should be and should experience over the course of the next few days.
Tessamont, is you rising? Tessamont? No. Richard Ford.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the breakout from prison of Hadouch Kabatu sounds less like the Great Escape and more like Fawlty Towers. It has helped bring to light that 262 prisoners were released by mistake last year and 115 were released by mistake the year before. For mistaken releases, what assurance can the Justice Secretary offer that the responsible contractors or subcontractors will be subject to the sort of financial penalties that motivate them to prevent further mistakes from happening?
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm not sure in this circumstance that this was subcontracted. He will understand that when we look at the 56,000 or so prisoners who are released from prison, many are being released into the hands of probation and asked to report to a probation office. Some are released for time served. There are both housing, employment, assessment needs, and he's right, I think behind his question, many are tagged at home. For some reason, Kabatu found himself in the wrong stream, because for foreign national offenders, it's an immigration removal centre and it's off on a plane, and that's what should have happened.
Justice Sartor.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the fact that Dame Lynn Owens will be speaking to the victims of Kabatu to understand the impact on them. But can the Deputy Prime Minister confirm whether the previous government made any steps to speak with victims affected by prison release errors under their watch due to starving the system of funding?
Secretary of State.
There were many cases of early prisoner release, and as I said before, whether it was William Fernandez in March 2021, whether it was Rayon Nubi in March 2023, or Loris Matavusas in December 2021, there were no independent investigations under the last government. Very little was said, or it would seem learned, even though 800 were released early. So this is a story that goes back a long way. It's in part because of a scheme that was set up under the last government and revised 4 times in the run-up to the general election, and it's why we must take a thorough look and reassure the public.
Simon Hall.
Very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Justice Secretary will know that police operational independence, free from political interference, is crucial and is enshrined in the police protocol.
Yeah.
And yet on page 3 of the statement, which the Secretary of State has just given us this afternoon, he told us, and I checked against delivery, over the weekend I chaired 3 operational meetings with the police.
Yeah, what's that all about?
What's changed?
Nice State.
Well, I know that the Right Honourable Gentleman has a tremendous experience in this chamber. I think he would think it was extremely lackadaisical if the Justice Secretary did not seek operational update from the police over the course of the weekend when this was top of the news cycle and of huge anxiety. Of course, operational matters are for the police, but I'm hugely grateful, and I said so to Mark Rowley this morning, and I was very pleased that it's local officers in the London Borough of Haringey that were able to detain Kabatu, and that's why I went up to Wood Green to thank them personally for what they had done.
Jonathan Davies.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The erroneous release of this individual was an appalling error. I'm grateful it has been caught and that the Justice Secretary will take steps to get to the bottom of what went wrong in this case. And I would be grateful if he comes back to the House in due course to report on his findings. Now, we know this government, when it started last year, inherited an appalling situation in respect of the prison estates, prisons fit to bursting and short staff. In fact, perhaps that's when the general election came when it did, rather than in the autumn, because there would have had to have been a prisoner release scheme later that year under the previous government. But I am sick of people coming to my constituency surgeries who have been victims of crime, who feel that justice is not being done. So can I urge him to redouble his efforts for this, to build up the prison places, but also take the steps to ensure that people, certainly at lower levels of crime, don't get into crime in the first place, because that's the way we save money in the long run.
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, and he's right to mention the end of early supervision licence scheme that was set up by the last government, revised 4 times, 10,000 people were released. It was done effectively on the quiet, it was done in a chaotic way, and that's when we began to see this spike. It's not about making partisan or political points, but the truth is we all know that the prison system that we inherited was in a dire situation, and we do need now to get a grip where mistakes are being made, and that's why the officer involved is suspended under investigation. The checks and balances in place are now the toughest that we've had. We're asking duty governors to be looking at this the night before, particularly in relation to foreign national offenders, and we've got Dame Lynn Owers doing a further investigation.
Ms Saville Roberts.
I'd like to put on record my role as the co-chair of the Justice Union's parliamentary group. Everyone here will want to make sure that this kind of outrageous error never happens again. The Chief Inspector of Prisons warned today of a systematic problem of increased releases and error, citing very busy people, often quite inexperienced, with huge caseloads. He also warned that prisons are dependent on West African officers who we might now lose thanks to changes to visa thresholds expected to cause, and I quote, an enormously damaging effect to some prisons. With this in mind, because his government has control over this, will the Justice Secretary press the Home Office to look again at how changes to the skilled workers visa are directly causing prison staff shortages and worsening prison performance?
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady for putting on record the challenge that we have with junior staff, and I'm very grateful to the work that we have in our prison system of those staff who are much beloved, who have come from West Africa, largely Nigeria, to support this system for a period of time. And I do recognise the challenges that she articulates, and of course, as she would expect,